Authorities are looking at social media websites like 8chan in an effort to stop future mass shootings. And Jeff Begay joins me now. Jeff, to talk a little bit about this. What's the difference? What sort of difference could Cloudflare make? And sort of give us a little more information.
Well, in terms of investigations, this is what the FBI and other agencies look at when they're looking for signs of potential trouble. In this case, it doesn't mean the end of 8chan and other websites that promote hate speech online. They will find a home. For example, the Daily Stormer, which is a neo-Nazi website, found a way to promote that rally in Charlottesville. It was taken down, but it later resurfaced. According to current and former law enforcement officials, many attackers are inspired online, and message boards and social media are giving these attackers the platform that they seek.
2 victims from gunshot wounds.
Many recent shootings share a troubling connection. The accused killers have left a blueprint for their alleged actions on social media, like the attack in a Pittsburgh synagogue last year in which 11 people were killed, and the massacre in Christchurch, New Zealand, in which 51 were killed. Nate Snyder is a former counterterrorism official in the Department of Homeland Security.
You have would-be recruiters and provokers who are using these platforms to get to people on a personal level.
The posts are out in the open, but difficult for law enforcement to spot unless they get a tip before an attack happens. Inside this conference room in an unmarked building, the FBI has been working to prevent future attacks. Analysts comb through dozens of recent active shooting cases. Agent Andre Simmons says they have been looking for patterns. It's not really accurate to say that someone just snapped.
Not at all. In fact, what we found is that all of the shooters in our study certainly planned and prepared. Many shooters spent almost 2 years.
2 years.
Planning their attack.
FBI studies have found that only 25% of active shooters had ever been diagnosed with mental illness, and that shooters aren't typically loners. 27% had significant online interaction.
He has a heightened interest in weapons and explosives.
The FBI tells us they receive 3 to 4 referrals a week of people who've landed on law enforcement's radar. But in the majority of cases, people who see the signs of trouble before mass shootings often don't call police. And the motivating factors, are they the same or different? They vary.
Usually it's a desire for some omnipotent control, even if it's just momentary. And there's also a degree of a desire for infamy and notoriety.
All right, Jeff, I can see what is so complicated about this, right? This is America. Freedom of expression, you're right. This is protected speech. So when does this sort of stuff, no matter how vile it is, when does it go from vile to illegal?
Yeah, and that is a really good question. And that, in fact, was one of the questions that I had for one of the top FBI officials who runs these investigations. Do you monitor social media, what people are saying? And they're very careful to say, no, we don't do that. However, if they get a tip about someone online making statements, they'll take a look. If they see that someone, by chance they get a tip and they see that somebody has crossed a line where they're threatening someone, and then they're taking actions toward potentially fulfilling that threat, for example, going out and buying a weapon, then they can, open a case. But they have to be really careful about, preserving people's constitutional rights.
Right.
And that's how they respond to those questions. But that is a very good question because, what we've seen with a lot of these cases, and there have been so many over the last couple of years, is that there is this common link here, and it usually points to something online.
Yeah, indeed. So I can get it that the FBI doesn't want to sort of broadcast that it's snooping essentially on your social media posts. Still, we have these websites we go back to over and over again. Like before 8chan, it was 4chan, and I think there was another incident that sort of caused 4chan to shut down. But even if the FBI was so inclined to snoop, could they? I mean, the manpower it would take.
Well, and listen, they would take issue with the word snoop.
So yeah, I shouldn't use that.
As someone who covers law enforcement. Right. And by the way, it's not just the FBI. There are other agencies, local agencies, state agencies. They look at these things too if they see that a threat is developing. And so it's just the nature of how this problem has evolved to the point where, law enforcement is using the tools that they have to stop some of these attacks from happening, because, I've talked to FBI officials recently, who talk about, the frequency of these attacks and how it is stretching these resources that they have. Because oftentimes, no matter where these attacks happen, if it's a mass shooting, the likes of which we've seen over the last few days, then they send resources to assist. They might not lead the investigation, but they'll send evidence collection teams to assist. And then they send victim help teams, essentially, to help these local officials deal with what becomes a massive story for these communities.
Right, right. So I want to read a statement released by the FBI about these shootings. The FBI saying that the shootings they underscore the continued threat posed by domestic violent extremists and perpetrators of hate crimes. Have you ever sort of seen a statement like this from the FBI before?
Well, listen, when I reported that overnight, and the statement was released late last night, oftentimes at the FBI, it takes some time to get statements like this out because, in some ways, in this political atmosphere, they can be perceived as controversial. But what I thought was interesting about this is that in the last couple of years of Director Wray's tenure as FBI director, I've never seen anything like that. And it sort of underscores the seriousness of this problem that really has been brought to light over the last few days. This is something that law enforcement really, and the FBI specifically, has been very vocal about, especially compared to some other agencies.
Yes.
Because they've seen this growing threat.
Yeah.
And so they have evolved to address the threat. And I think that statement is an example of that.
Yeah, that is really interesting. Jeff Begay, thank you very much.
My pleasure.